Hi, I'm Nikki Jovicic from Lookupstrata. We're recording this session on the 7th of March 2022 as the weather event on the East Coast is occurring. This event has and continues to cause widespread flooding and water damage up and down the East Coast. Our thoughts are with those affected. Please stay safe. Will Marquand from Tower Body Corporate's joining me to speak about the event and the types of damages buildings are seeing, especially in the Southeast Queensland area. We hope this information aids both body corporate owners and committees. We discuss what to do now, how long lot owners may be affected, ways committees can navigate the issues, and what you can do in your building to mitigate risks for the future. This includes tips about why now is the perfect time to look at your sinking fund, plus scheduling preventative maintenance for the future. Finally, we speak about insurance and flood cover. This is not advice. You should seek independent advice before acting on the information contained in this session. And as a further disclaimer, as well as being owner and director of Lookupstrata, I'm managing director of Tower Body Corporate. Welcome, Will. We're talking about the current weather situation that's happening on the East Coast and the way it's affecting strata buildings up and down the coast. Will's located in Southeast Queensland. So Will, what are you seeing out there? I believe you've still got storms coming through fairly frequently. You had another one hit yesterday and it's affecting buildings continuously.
Yeah, so I'm located on the Gold Coast, and yesterday there was a storm of just tremendous intensity for about 30 minutes or so. A huge volume of water must have fallen during that storm, and as I'm coming to the office this morning, we're starting to see, you know, the calls and emails coming through of reports of damage. My team are currently working on that, and that'll just mean further claims and further work that needs to be done. As everyone's aware, over the last week, of course, especially the Brisbane area has had massive damage with significant flooding events. That's affected a huge number of body corporate buildings. A lot of committee members out there have been doing sort of fairly heroic work trying to bring those back to standard, but it's going to be a very long and slow cleanup process for a lot of sites, I'm afraid. Total disaster for a lot of people, unfortunately.
So can you give us an idea what sort of damage are you seeing in the buildings, or are they experiencing out there at the moment in that Southeast Queensland area?
Sure. So Brisbane's been the worst affected. Really, it's the flooding of car park basements and things like that seems to have been where the most major damage has taken place. And then you're talking about all of the normal damage that occurs when there's storms, which is roofs and windows. So a lot of water ingress through a roof, through a window, damaging rooms, building the tops of buildings. It's quite significant. There's going to be many thousands of additional insurance claims, I should think, and there's going to be an extreme amount of pressure on contractors to attend, because no one wants to wait with like a hole in their roof or something like that. But there's a massive demand and backlog at the moment for contractors to attend as soon as they can.
Okay, and we've spoken about that on other recordings that we've done with people previously about the pressures that are being put on the construction industry and prices anyway, with what's happening with inflation and just a backlog of getting building materials through. And it's just like a bit of they've sort of termed it a perfect storm, which it seems like this is even added to. So yeah, it is something that committees probably need to be aware of. So if you're in a building and you've been either affected previously by the flooding, or you're seeing flooding coming through from these storms that are still rolling through the area, what could you be doing as either a lot owner or a committee member at the moment?
Well, it's extremely difficult in the sense that, as you say, we have already got a perfect storm of limited supply of both materials and contractors, and these storms are only going to exacerbate that. You can expect to see prices going up, because that's what happens when situations like this occur, and you can expect to see longer queues because there's just more work to do than there was 2 weeks ago, and it's going to take those contractors quite a long time to go around to all of the properties that are affected. What can you do if you're a committee, and what can you do if you're an owner? It's very tough. Like if you don't have the sort of skills yourself, you might just have to be on the list. What you need to do is consider how urgent your works are and be patient within that context. So if you have a minor leak to a window or something like that, you might just have to accept that you're slightly behind in the queue to a building that's had its whole basement flooded or something along those lines, because, well, body corporate managers, insurers and contractors are all having to triage these works as they come through. And, fair enough, we have to put the emphasis on the buildings that have been most severely affected. So perhaps the first thing that you can do is be patient. You can also assist perhaps by calling around, looking for contractors yourself if you're a committee member. If you're speaking to your body corporate manager and asking them to arrange a contractor to attend for you, you might need to remember that you are one of, I don't know, perhaps 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 different people who are contacting that manager on the day. They're only going to have limited capacity to call people, and it might make a difference if a committee member is able to make 2 or 3 extra calls to find that one person who is able, who does have that little bit of extra capacity to come out to your site. That's one way that could help. I think the other thing the committee members might need to do is sort of sit down and start looking at some forward planning. Maybe that won't resolve this event too much, but it might start. You might need to start thinking about what's going to happen when the next event occurs, and the next event after that. They're not all going to be as bad as this one, but we know that there's going to be rain in the future, and we know that there's going to be storms. So if your building suffered minor damage, perhaps now's the time to start thinking about, well, what can we do to make sure that we don't suffer minor damage in the future? Maybe getting a roofer out on a more regular basis to tidy up those little issues that can occur, or perhaps having a building inspection done more frequently so that you can do the work, when the sun's shining, essentially, and you're not stuck waiting until after a major event and then finding yourself in a long queue of people for attention.
Okay, so having conversations about what the building experience, the way it was handled at that point, and then possibly looking at what you could have done better, or if your building wasn't affected this time, what you can learn from other buildings and how you can sort of set yourself up so that if an event like this happens again or something similar, you've got some sort of a plan in place, or you know a little bit more about what to do in that situation.
Correct. Yeah, there's some things that we can't change. We can't change the intensity of the weather. We can't change things like the location of your building. So if you're in a site that's more prone to be flooding than one that isn't, if you're at the bottom of a hill as opposed to the top or something like that, you can't change that kind of thing. But you can know that you're more likely to suffer damage, and then you can take preparation. You can undertake preparations to try to prevent against that. Perhaps now's the time to have a good look at that. If your building wasn't affected, now is also a very good time to think about it, because maybe you just got lucky this time. Maybe this time, the roulette wheel didn't come to your building and attack and hit you very hard, but the next time it could. And if you're now's a very good time to get people thinking about what kind of preventative maintenance they could undertake, because the storms have just happened. They're much more likely to be aware of what the possible damage is and what the possible risks are for their building. If you leave that 6-12 months or something like that, then, well, out of sight, out of mind. People tend to forget, and it's very easy to say, oh, well, we weren't too badly hit last time. We could just put it off for another 6 or 12 months, and then you put it off, and then the next storm happens, and then this time it could be your building that's hit. So I think every owner across the state really needs to start thinking much more carefully about how resistant their building is to this type of incident, because, well, this is the worst storm we've had since 2011, but I think, as everyone knows, the weather is getting worse. It's certainly getting more intense. The storm last night on the Gold Coast was just an incredible intensity. It wasn't that long, it was 30 minutes or so, but the volume of rain that would have come down in that time was huge. And a lot of our buildings aren't really designed for that type of weather. They're not currently proofed against the intensity of the storms that we're starting to see on a much more frequent basis. That means the buildings are going to have to change, because the storms themselves are not going to change for us, right? The weather is going to continue to get more intense. It's going to you're probably going to see storm events like this. This is, well, twice in 10 years now. And then what if it becomes once every 5 years or something like that? Well, buildings are going to have to become more resilient, and owners are going to have to look at the ways that can happen.
Okay, now I'm just going to look back for a second, and you talked about committee members being able to help strata managers in this situation by contacting contractors. So I just wanted to mention that if you're doing that, you should be making sure that those contractors are definitely licensed if they're coming out to the properties, checking credentials. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, because I'm sure that on storms like this, there's always a few cowboys around who will be taking advantage. So yes, should always check for license and registration, and then any reasonable contractor should be able to send that through to you without any questions or without any concerns. If anyone's resistant, well, that's a red flag, and you should probably, I would move on from that person.
Definitely. Okay. All right. So now we're talking about how the situations are changing and whether events are happening more frequently, and that's affecting insurance as well, isn't it? So would you like to speak about that for a little while as well?
Yeah, this is going to be a massive insurance event, and everyone's aware of that. You know, my office, we've probably made a few dozen claims in the last week or so, and we'll be making even more over the next couple of weeks, because not every issue becomes immediately apparent on day one. Some people wait a little bit of time before they let me know. That's going to be one of many thousands of claims that are going in, and they're all going to have a significant effect on body corporate insurance moving forward. We're already in a marketplace where insurance has been rising year on year for a number of years now, and the costs of the premiums are really pushing a lot of body corporate plans budgets out to an uncomfortable level. Unfortunately, that's going to increase. That's not going to go away. So you can expect premiums to rise quite a bit over the next few years, partly as a result of this storm. You can also expect body corporate insurers perhaps to tighten the terms that they'll offer. They're much more, if they think these storms are going to come more frequently, and they think that costs them a lot of money, they're much more likely to restrict the terms of coverage and offer body corporates insurance for things that they want. Flood coverage is probably the obvious one. It's currently mostly an optional for most sites, but you've already got large areas where insurers won't offer flood coverage. You can expect the size of those areas to be expanded. Who knows, perhaps even the whole of southeast Queensland, they'll just sort of start saying we can no longer cover floods for your buildings, and that's going to have a major impact, because then if no one can get flood coverage, it's anytime there's a flood, it's going to be the owners who are left paying. So we're going to have to consider that quite carefully over the next few years.
Okay, and we've recently published an article on that as well by Tyrone Shandyman from Strata Insurance Solutions. So I might even pop a link to that article below this video so people can have a read about that. And that article is what to do if you're not covered by flood insurance, if your building's not covered by flood insurance, and some other options that you might be able to take. So we'll certainly include that. Okay, so, sorry.
I'm just going to say that's a very good article, and it's worth reading for everyone. I mean, I'm dealing with one building in Brisbane, for example, that's an interesting case. It doesn't have flood coverage, but they are going to argue that their damage was done by water coming down, rainwater coming down, rather than water coming up, if you like. How are they going to prove that? Well, in this case, the building's quite fortunate in that they were very organised as a committee, and they took a lot of videos showing the damage started, of when the damage started from the rain coming down, and they intend to provide that to the insurers so that, you know, their claim can be progressed. You know, they're optimistic that it'll work out. Not everyone will have done that though, and then it can get very difficult. So you're going to have buildings that might have the same argument that the damage was done before the floods actually occurred, but it was done by water ingress coming down through the building. But if you haven't had the evidence to show that, it might be very difficult to make your case. So one part of what we're thinking about here in terms of the insurance is when a major event happens, committees have to start thinking about, well, we have to mobilize straight away, unfortunately. We have to start getting into action in terms of collating evidence and organizing our response almost immediately. They can be very difficult, especially if you're, even if you're at the building, it could be that your unit's being affected or something like that, and you maybe just don't have the opportunity to do that. But nonetheless, that's where the pressure sits. It's with the committee members to try to talk to each other and try to think about, as soon as possible, what your response to insurers might be, or how you might limit any damage that's ongoing.
Okay, and even if you're a lot owner in a building, you can assist, can't you, by taking videos and providing that evidence to the committee at a later date, because it not only helps with the insurance claims, but it also helps with the contractors coming in, because they can see what's happening and where the water's coming from.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, information is power. So the more information that's available, the easier it is to present it to the insurers, present it to the contractors, and the faster it can be for your building to be repaired. The less information there is, the longer it takes. So, yeah, certainly lot owners too can have a very large role to play.
Excellent. Okay, so with moving forward and looking into the future and when the sun might actually shine again and you stop getting these rolling storms coming through, we've talked in a few instances about preventative maintenance for next time. One of the things you've mentioned is having the conversations with from a committee point of view about what you could do better and what you could do looking forward. What else can you do at that point to mitigate any risks or loss moving forward?
Well, to put it bluntly, buildings that have managed well through this crisis have tended to be buildings with cash in the bank, basically. And we've got some buildings who have a lot of money in the bank and some that hardly have any. But if you've got money in the bank, even if it wasn't safe for the purpose of, rectifying storm damage or something like that, well, at least you're able to act, and at least you're able to say, okay, we've got 10,000 for this, we can put 20,000 here, and you can move very quickly. If you don't have a sinking fund built up, if you don't have cash in the bank, you're in real trouble, because then the committee and the body corporate manager not only have to try to arrange repairs, but they have to juggle the finances of those repairs. And you might be able to get money very reasonably quickly through organising a special levy, perhaps a Strata loan, but those aren't really very happy scenarios for most people. And it's hard to think about those when you've got other damage at the building. And we can be talking about big damage here. It could be that every owner in a building has to come up suddenly 3,000, 5,000, maybe even 10,000 or something like that. So I think the first thing is that buildings without cash, liquid cash available to them, they need to look at that and they need to think about whether they're going to be able to handle an emergency or not. And if not, well, then you've really only got one choice, which is you have to look at starting to raise extra funds and having that safety buffer available to you for when the worst does happen. And you have to expect that the worst will happen instead of expecting that we'll be all right, it won't be too bad. That kind of mentality is not going to help you when you hit an emergency situation like this. So money matters. That's just the cold reality of life. The other thing that a lot of buildings need to look at is their preventative maintenance and make sure they have a proper preventative maintenance schedule in place. It's one of those very easy ones. It's so easy to put off doing, because often it feels like you're paying for something where you don't get very much return, right? So, well, does someone come out to your building every year to check for possible risk elements? A lot of people think, oh, well, I think we're okay, that's fine. But, and then the storm happens and it turns out they're not okay. It turns out that they're having a much more significant problem. So I think you've got to look at preventative maintenance on roofs, windows, and then basements. It tends to mean in pumps and things like that. You should just, if you're a community member, just send your body corporate manager an email. Just say, hey, do you know when the last time our pumps were serviced or something like that? If everything's going well, they should be able to say, sure, it was 3 months ago, 6 months ago, whatever it is, and that's a sign that your building is running effectively. If they say, oh, I'm not too sure, it's over 12 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, well then your pumps aren't being serviced, and when you need them most, they might not be ready to be working. That unfortunately has happened a lot over the last couple of weeks. Buildings that thought they were safe weren't, because they haven't been keeping up with that preventive maintenance schedule.
Okay, all right. Well, that's great. Thank you so much. Well, that gives us a lot of information to go on, and I'm sure that committees and lot owners will find it helpful. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, moving like at the end of this session now, just to let people know something else that they should be keeping in mind?
Well, I mean, we haven't mentioned it, but we hope everyone's safe and sound. I think what's important to know is that people are out there supporting you. The industry mobilizes in situations like this. And what I've found, I'm someone who works in both at the forefront and in the background in some ways. I deal with the customers, but the customers don't always see all of the action that happens behind the scenes. As an industry, what I've found is that people have been extremely helpful through the last few weeks. The brokers, the insurers, the contractors, everyone's had the best interests of the customers at heart. And sometimes it can be quite difficult to see and feel that when you're a body corporate customer, and perhaps in the ordinary flow of life, I understand that there's lots of little tensions that are going on all the time. But when you have when a terrible situation like this occurs, people actually do work together, and they are working in the best interests of the customers first and foremost, and a lot of their regular business concerns become secondary. So I think what you need to bear in mind is it might be frustrating for the next might be frustrated. Some of these claims, it might take many months to resolve, and it might take a long time for the contractors to finally get to some of the buildings. But I think you do need to know that, there's no lack of determination on the part of the people in the industry to try to make these things happen for you.
Okay, and I think one of the things that people should keep in mind too is the scope of the event, because it is all the way up and down the coast there, so it's a huge amount of buildings, and they're trying to get people out to all of those spaces, and
yeah, terrible. I mean, I'm talking to a roofer I've been working with, and I'm like, can you come up to the Gold Coast? He's like, no, I'm in Lismore, my home's flooded. It's terrible for him.
That's all. That's it. They've been affected as well, haven't they?
Yeah, so, but it's what it goes. But that's one less contractor who's available for the next few months, and you multiply that out across the whole country, and it's a significant crisis.
That's exactly right. Well, like Will said, we hope that everyone's staying safe. We hope that this video and chat will assist people out there to resolve the issues that they're currently facing, and hopefully your area won't be hit with too many more of those awful rainstorms over the next week until everything starts to dry out.
Hopefully so.
Okay, thank you so much.
We'll keep working. Thank you very much.
Thank you.